Hello guys, welcome to this tutorial. Before we get started, I want to let you know that you can find all the code example and resources we'll be using today in the GitHub Repository linked in the video description below. This repository serves as a valuable companion to the tutorial, allowing you to follow along, experiment, and explore the code on your own. Hey guys, welcome back to the Devergo channel. So embarking on the creation of this cheat sheet has been a long-standing aspiration for me, driven by the desire to consolidate the myriad approaches to data fetching in Next.js and React. Online resources abound with the diverse libraries, numerous examples, and theoretical frameworks, each developer advocating for their favorite technique. So it is crucial to recognize that there is no one-size-fits-all solution for data fetching. Instead, the optimal approach depends on the unique requirements of a project. Actually, with this cheat sheet, I want to provide a comprehensive guide offering flexibility and empowerment for developers to select the most suitable method tailored for their specific needs. So today we are diving deep into the world of Next.js fetching and mutations pattern. Understanding this pattern is crucial for building efficient and dynamic web application. So in this tutorial, we are going to explore a whopping of 32 different fetching and mutations patterns. But don't worry, I will break them down step by step. We will see together coding line by line and providing both the theory behind each pattern and practical example with real code. So in subsequent tutorials, maybe you can find also advanced libraries like such React Use Query, AceWR, Apollo, and others. But we will explore sophisticated technique, including caching strategies, scaling, and others. But however, in this particular tutorial, our focus is on establishing a foundational understanding. So we will categorize data fetching pattern based on 3 key factors. Okay, as you can see on the cheat sheet, we see 3 elements, that is invocation, execution, and data usage. Invocation and execution context, we will discern whether the fetching function is triggered on the client or on the server. So, and where the retrieved data is intended to use, where we invoke the function, where we execute, if on the client or on the server, and where we are going to use the data. And we also divide in 2 big groups that depending on the triggering mechanism. So if it's a first loading, so it's just when we load the page, we are going to fetch data, or if the fetching function is triggered by a user event like onClick. So this segmentation will not only elucidate actually the fundamental patterns, but also lay the groundwork for comprehending more advanced concepts in subsequent tutorials. So by discerning these distinctions, developers can better align their approach with the specific need of their project, building a solid foundation before delving into much more intricate and complex data fetching strategies. So, as you can see, the cheat sheet is divided in columns. We are with the first and the last group. Actually, we are not going to explore in this tutorial because actually use some technology that is not correlated with the interaction between client and server part. Okay, I want to discover all the technique where there is interaction between server and client. In the first column, as we can see, server and server, it means that the invocation is on the server, the execution of the function of the fetching is on the server, and data usage is on the server. Actually, it's just normal fetching that happen in Node.js, and it's triggered, is invoked by the server. It can be like workers, like a time event, can be like cron. Is everything that happened on the server and just stay there. Okay, it doesn't actually involve the client. And there are many libraries and many techniques to fetch data to send an API call on the server. The last column actually is another scenario where actually we are not going to explore in this tutorial, is where the trigger, where the invocation is from the server and also the execution, and the data is going to be sent to the client. So actually is this kind of scenario involve all the technologies that enables our like a unidirectional communication channel between a web browser and a web server over a single HTTP connection. But the primary purpose of this is to facilitate the server pushing updates or notification to the client in real time. Unlike traditional HTTP requests where the client initiates a communication SSE actually allows the server to initiate communication when new information becomes available, and we are not going to explore in this tutorial. So let's focus on the stuff that we can apply on Next.js and in React. So the first column actually is a client server. It means that invocation is from the client and can be first loading from the page or by the user, like in an on-click event or any user interaction with the page. The second column is invocation on the client, and the execution of the fetching function is on the server, and the data are returned back to the client. So the data usage is going to be on the client. Also, in this case, we are going to divide in two big groups, like first loading and user event, and we will see one by one how it works. And the other column is where invocation is on the client, the execution is also on the client. So we send the API call, the fetching, directly from the client, from the browser, and once we retrieve the data, we're going to send to server, okay? For example, some mutation or for some server operations. And the last one is everything happen on the client. So it's just a browser API call, okay? And we retrieve data that are used by the client directly on the browser. We will see some cases with first loading or user event. Actually, which are the pros and cons of each approach? That's depend on the specific case. For example, if actually the difference is where we execute the fetching function. If we execute on the server, we have some benefit, but also if we execute on the client, we have other kind of pros and cons. So let's discover one by one. For example, when we execute the data fetching on the server, actually we have to consider that there are some pros, like we have direct server access. So it's like an easier interaction. So directly access server-side database and resources make it simpler to integrate with backend services, actually. And also we have to consider the data consistency, ensure that the server has a consistent authoritative source of data. So let's discuss about the pros of each approach. So executing data fetching from the server or on the client. The pros of fetching data on the server actually are many. And first of all, we have a direct server access. It's an easier interaction. We directly access server-side database and resources, so make it simpler to integrate with backend services. We have to consider also data consistency. Ensure that the server has a consistent and authoritative source of data. Another important benefit is improved server-side rendering, because if we fetch the data directly on the server, we can enhance the initial page load. For example, server-side rendering helps in providing a fully rendered page to the client, leading to improved initial page load times. And we must consider SEO benefits. Search engine can easily index the server rendered content, improving SEO. Another important benefit about the fetching data on the server, maybe it's the more important one, is the security, the data protection. By keeping the API call on the server, you can better protect sensitive information, as the client does not have direct access to the raw data. Authentication and authorization. Server-side execution allows for more robust implementation of authentication and authorization mechanisms, reducing the risk of unauthorized access. We have to consider also the reduced exposure of API keys. Secure storage, for example, API keys and other sensitive information can be securely stored on the server, reducing the risk of exposure compared to the client-side storage. Control over API calls. We can control the rate and the monitoring. We can limit the rate. Is an easier implementation of a rate limiting and monitoring the API calls from a centralized location. The compliance, the data privacy compliance, is a really important concern. Easier adherence to data privacy regulation as sensitive operations are performed on the server, which is under more direct control. Another important pros is the session management, the session handling, centralized session management on the server, providing better control over user session. We have to consider also the reduced client-side logic, minimize client complexity, reduce complexity on the client side, as it primarily focuses on rendering and user interaction without being burdened with data fetching and processing. Another problem that we can face on the client fetching, that's why in many cases we use the server fetching, is the coarse issues. cross-origin resource sharing. Actually, the cross-origin API calls can lead to coarse issues requiring additional configuration and potentially compromising security. If we manage the API call on the server, we will avoid coarse problem. So let's analyze on the other side why executing a data fetching on the client can be potentially better in some case. One of the benefits is the reduced server load. Offloading API calls to the client reduces the server load, improving server scalability and responsiveness. Faster subsequent navigation, optimize client-side interaction. The navigation within the client can be faster as the client handles data fetching and rendering locally. Another important consideration is the improved responsiveness, enhanced user experience, faster and more responsive interaction as the client manages data fetching without waiting for server responses. We have to consider also that can be optimized for dynamic application, like it's ideal for application with dynamic content or real-time updates where immediate client-side data manipulation is essential. Another consideration is about the reduced server-side rendering overhead. Lighter server rendering, the server can focus on serving data and the rendering responsibilities are primarily handled by the client, reducing server-side rendering overhead. Also for optimized single-page application can be an advantage. It's well suited for single-page application. We can consider also we have a better offline support, enhanced offline functionality. Client-side data caching allows for improved offline support as the client can store data locally. We have more freedom to make a parallel API request. The parallelization can lead to a better performance. The client can make multiple API requests in parallel, optimize the efficiency and responsiveness. And also the client-side caching opportunities we reduce in some case when we need the server dependency for some operation. We can optimize for progressive web apps, and anyway, we have a potential lower latency. So actually, in summary, while client-side API calls offer benefits such as improved responsiveness and reduced server load, they come with challenges when we talk about security, SEO, data consistency, and complexity in error handling. So the decision should be based on the specific requirements and consideration of your application. So let's start our trip discovering all the fetching and mutation patterns that we see in these cheat sheets. Actually, we will start with the client server. We're going to create some pattern for the first loading and then the user event. Anyway, during the tutorial, you will see on the top left of the page, you will see a label that indicates in which part of the cheat sheet we are developing. Let's start with the invocation from the client, okay, execution on the server, and data users on the server. Actually, we start with the front page. That actually the Next.js page is by definition a server-side rendered component. If we fetch the data inside the page, we are sure that the API call is going to be executed on the server. So let's start by coding. So we are back to our Next.js tutorial. We are going to create some routes, and we give some names that help us to understand which kind of techniques we are going to use for that specific pattern. So the name of the first route is going to be, considering the first column on the cheat sheet, we are going to give the name fetching to be client server. It means we invoke from the client, we execute in the server, we use the data on the server, and this FL that stands for first loading. Actually, we fetch the data on the page first load. Here we go. We create the route. We are going to create the page inside that is a page.jsx. So you see that actually we are from the page. So actually is a API call directly on the page in the server. Let's create a page. So page is export default async function that is page. We just create a scenario where we use the fetching data on the server for some server operation or mutation in this case. Let's add some line of data in a txt file in the server. So we fetch data from the server and we add some line on a txt files. We need the fs package from Next.js, file system, And for now, we can directly fetch the data here at the top of the page because we are sure it's on the server, so we can execute directly from here. So it's going to be the API call. We can use sync await in the server-side component. We can use the asynchron method, async await. We cannot do, for example, in the CSR component. So this is one of the benefits to use the server-side rendered components. We can use await. We use the simple one fetch from Next.js, the API service that give us important information about cat. For all the cat lovers, maybe something interesting. Actually, I'm a dog lover, but we can also use this one. Fact is okay. This is our API service. We put it in the option that we want to revalidate each time we make the call. If not, it will be cached from Next.js. So we put revalidate 0. So each time I make a fetch request, it will make a new fetch and it will not cache the data. So the data is going to be here. Transform the response in JSON format. And we're going to save this data inside a txt file in the server. Okay, we append some line in the file. The file path is going to be file path server file example with one e. This folder here and this .txt. Here we go. And we execute the file system operation. Pen file. We take the file path here. Here we go. And I want to write action from the page. So we know that the operation is from the page. I want to put actually the data I retrieve from the API call. Let's put a backtick so we can create a dynamic string. Here we go. So from the page, we can put the data here. And also we go on the new line from the file. Here we go. So here we're going to put the data that actually the API call give us an object with the attribute fact that is like a string of informations about cat. And also we want to manage some error occurs, and we return a function to manage the error. And we can say if we console log our error, else we want to know that the file was updated without problem. So it's going to console.error. We can write error pending file. So see error here. If not, it's going to be console.log. Write new row added successfully. Okay, here we go. And at the end of the page we return our content. It's going to be, first of all, we put a container that with some style, just put some margin, and here we go. We can put 10 pixels. We go inside this container. We are going to put nothing, because in this case it's just I want to fetch the data from the page. I want to, as you can see, we want to use the data on the server, so we are going to do everything on the server, on the page. So let's see if it works. We're going to run our application, npm run dev. Let's see. We go to this route that is fetch client server fl, and let's see what happens. Just wait. And here we go. We see this text, data dispatched on the server, fetching both from the page. And it means that, as you can see, it creates a new file on this path. Actually, is the root path. And if we go on the file, it appends the data that we got from the API call and this action from the page. And this is the cat fact. A cat will tremble or shiver when it is extreme pain. And here we go. We saw the first method. Let's go to discover the second one. So we are back to our roadmap, to our cheat sheets, and we're going to analyze the next strategy that is from SSR comp. So we are going to invoke a fetching function from the client, execute on the server because it's going to be executed from the SSR component, and we use the data inside the server. Here we go. So we're going to create a server component, and we create a new file that is called server comps.jsx. We declare server only on top of the file to be sure that Next.js will execute this code only on the server. Okay, it's just like a more security that this code is going to run on the server. So we also import fs here because we are going to fetch the data inside the server with with the same action that we are going to add a new line in the server file example.txt like before, and go. Actually, we can copy the same block of code that we create before inside the page here because the logic we are going to use the same. And there we go. We copy here. We trigger a fetch call here to the same API, and we transform the response in a JSON file. The file path is the same. We are going to add a new line on the text file, and everything is going to be the same. And here we go. And actually is exactly like the page, because the page is a server component. We are going to apply exactly the same strategy. So we are going to return div container here, and we can write here on the component that let's apply maybe a little style, like just a color, and we can write, actually this is a SSR component that trigger, okay, some fetching on first load, okay, with data usage on the server. We're going to use the data inside, we're going to write the data we fetch inside the file. So the data is not returning back to the client, but will be used on the server. We go back to the page. Actually, we import the file that we just created, the component that we just create now is a SSR component, and is from our file server comp. So here on the txt file, I'm going to write action from the SSR component. It's not the page, it's the SSR component, and with some data from the API call. So we see that it updates again, and we see on the file that we add another line that is action from the SSR component. A cat will tremble and shiver when it's the screen pane. Every time I reload the page, it triggers the two API calls. The second one works as expected. We are back to our map, and I want to show you the case where we fetch some data from a server-side render component, but is nested inside a client-side render component. So it's a particular pattern because actually we cannot import directly an SSR component inside a client component. So we have to create a special component to wrap this nested one. And in this case, we will see that the action will be dispatched inside the server-side component. It means that everything happened on the server, but we pass this component from the client one. Okay, so it can be useful in some scenario where, for example, we want to keep on the leaves, we want to keep on the final part of our tree some server-side component for any reason, and what happened inside the component is protected on the server. First of all, I want to create a wrapper component. We create a new file that is client comps, and inside this file we are going to declare that is use client, and we create this component that is CSR comp, and we pass to this component as children the SSR one that is here, and here we go, and it's going to return just the children. It's going to return it. Here we go. After that, we go back to our server component file, and we are going to create a special component that is called SSR comp inside a CSR component. Okay, so it's going to be a sync and give back our body. So here I will copy paste the same code as before to make it faster. We make the API call here the same way. Everything is going to be the same. We dispatch a server operation inside the server that is appending a new line on the file that we already created before. But here we are going to write that the action from the SSR component nested in the CSR component on first load. So the first time that we load the page, and we are going to add also the data from the API call, and we are going to return some content to see on the page, just to know that we add this part. It's just, and going to add this part here that is actually, this is a SSR nested component that fetch data on first load that use data on the server. Now we go on the page, and first of all we are going to import the client component that is CSR comp from client comps. We go. This is our client component. We are going to wrap our CSR component here, and we are going to put inside the children that actually is the special SSR comp that we create just right now. Here we go. It's this one. Here we go. It's going to be here. We passed our SSR component inside our client-side component. This code is going to run on the server. Okay, we go back to our page. Here we have a little problem. Object and value as a real child, found object with case children. Actually, yeah, here we make a mistake because actually I have to return JSX, not an object directly. So here we go. Okay, so now we see that this part is our server-side rendered nested in this CSR component, and if we go to our file, so every time I update this page, we're going to have a third line that actually is the one that we created just right now, the SSR comp nested in our CSR, and here is the API fetched data. It works. Now I want to show you the case where we have a CSR component, and on the first load of our page it will trigger a server actions, and this server action will do something on the server. In this case, we'll fetch the data and keep the data on the server. Okay, server action is a new feature already from Next.js 13. It was experimental, and now in Next.js 14 is a stable, and it's really is a powerful feature that helps us to run code on the server, and it helps us to integrate some server-side function inside the CSR component. We can also, of course, use the server action inside the SSR, but actually the main purpose is to trigger them from the CSR. We go back to our project, and we're going to create a client component here that we call export const. We call CSR comp A, is to make it different from the other one. And inside this component, okay, actually, when we want to execute a function or do something after the component is rendered on the client component, we have to use the useEffect method, okay, from React. We cannot, like in the server component, just put, like in this case that it's much simpler. Actually, we can put just a wait because it is an asynchronous component from the server-side component. Help us to make it really easy, like in this way, because everything happens on the server and can be asynchronous. But in the client component, we cannot make the client asynchronous because actually it's not a function itself, but is a component, and on the browser cannot use the asynchronous and the await method. So in this case, we have to apply the useEffect, and the useEffect will make the function, in our case, the server action, run after the component is rendered. For useEffect from React. And we are going to import also a server action here. We call server action A. Now we are going to create in our new file that is server actions.js here. Okay, we create a file here where we are going to create some function, some server action function, and the file is that one. And inside this file, we are going to make it as a server action, we have to declare use server here. And at the same way as before, we want to fetch some data and keep the data on the server. So we're going to use that data in the fs method. We are going to add some new line of our server file like before. So we create our server action. Okay. Is a sync go, and it's going to be here. So the code block is exactly the same as before because it's just the same API call, and that we run from here. We have some problem here. It's not import, it's export. We need to import the fs from fs here. Here we go. This is the server action, and they will do the same. We'll append the file here, and we want to specify that is a server action from CSR component, okay, function in a separate file, and here we are going to put the data. In the server action here, we have two methods to declare a server action in a separate file, like in this case, and we put the use server on top, and this is our case actually, as you can see here. In the CSR component, but in the server component, we can also declare the server action inside the component and put use server directly on the top of the function body, and we will see later. In this case, we use a function in a separate file with the use server on the top, and this is our server action. We go back to our page, and we want to add this new component. We have to finish to create our component here, and we add our use effect on top. Here we go. The body is here, and we trigger just one without any dependency. Here we go. So we just run the server action A that we just import after the component is rendered. Okay, this is just our case, and here we go. We have everything here. Okay, in our page, we import, we save it here. In our page, we import our CSR comp A, that is the new component that we just create right now, and we add on the bottom of other component here. We're ready to test it. Here we go. So we update the page, and we see this part actually that is the content of the component, and we should see in the server file example the fetched data every time we update the page. Okay, but what we see here, we see that the action is dispatched twice, so it is triggered 2 times. So let's discover why Next.js apply this behavior. In the dev mode, Next.js render twice, okay, because it applied the strict mode. Okay, it applied the normal and the strict mode, so it render always twice. And we can switch off this behavior just going to the next config, and we put inside our object, can just declare React strict mode, and we switch false. We render the client component just one. Let's see if it works. So if we go to our page, we go back to see our component, and if I update the page, if I reload the page, wait, we see that our server action was executed just once. Okay, this is the normal behavior that we will have also on the production. Let's see a similar case as the previous one, that is the server action in the SSR. Actually, the structure and the technique is similar, it's almost the same, but it happened all inside the server-side render component. We are back in our server components, and we can use the previous SSR component that we already create to dispatch a server action inside this component, okay? Actually, it's just a function that is declared inside the component with the use server on top of the body of the function. So we are going actually to create a server we call server action here. This async. Here we go. Here we go. And here we specify that is a server action here. It's useless actually, because in server side we are sure that everything is going to run on the server, but we just see that we can also create a server action inside a component. But anyway, if we don't declare use server, the final behavior is going to be the same. Anyway, the function run inside the server. So use server here, we apply exactly the same code as we can find here. There is the fetch call. The fetch example is a server action from the SSR component use server on top of the body function. Okay, so it's another way to use the server action. And here we go. We can leave everything like that, and we will see that when we upload this component, we are going to run the action directly here. So if we update the page again and we go on our file, we see that Next.js run our server action from the SSR component, okay, the use server on top of the body function. Let's discover the next pattern that is still in the same group of triggering from the client, executing on the server, and consuming the data also in the server. This technique actually involves using the route handler in Next.js. That actually is just a normal API call from the browser, from the client, to our Next.js route handler. And actually is a good method, it's a good technique. If you are not, in some cases, you can use the server actions. This is a good alternative. And let's discover how to implement. First of all, we are going to create a route inside our API. We create a new route that we call fetching, okay, a new folder that is fetching, and inside we're going to create a route.js. Here we go. For the moment, we are going to create just get API. Okay, so we import Next.js response, next response, next server, and we create our route handler that actually is a get method, a request inside here, and we want to make this route handler dynamic. So we are going to create two options. The first option is to handle an API call when we want to use the data on the server, and this is the case. And later we will implement another method to use the data to the client. So it means that in the first case, if I use the data in the server, I don't need to return back any data from the external API call. But in the case where we want to consume the data on the client, on the browser, we have to return back the data from here. So in this case, we just use the data in the server, and it's going to be before we create an API call to our getFact free API. And actually, we can directly from our client comp to our server actions, the method is going to be the same, and just do the same here. Okay, we fetch some data here, and we revalidate every time we request. We don't want to cache any data. The server file is the same, and here we are going to say that actually we want to write in a file that is an action from route handler. We always have to return something. We will get an error from Next.js, and this next response and .json. Here we're going just to send a message that we call is should on the server. Okay, let's return something like that. And here we go. So we have our route handler. Here we need to let's make like a condition actually from the URL parameters. We want to specify in this case that the fetch type is request dot next URL dot search items, and we will write on the URL the fetch type parameter. Okay, and we will call it this way in this case if fetch type is, we want use in this case on the server, so we can call that usage the server. That we uses our case together with another option, and here we are going to call this endpoint here. We get with a get request, and what we're going to put on URL the parameter fetch type, and the value of the parameter will be data usage server. Okay, so let's create the API call on the client. Okay, so we go back to our client comps. We create a new component here that is CSR comp v. So in this case, we are still in the group that we make a fetching while we first load the page. In this case, on the client, we need a use effect to perform an action, an API call after the component is run like this, and we start a fetch here, and the fetch is going to be, in this case, is going to be localhost. For the production, we are going to change with the server DNS. So here we just put our API route and we call it fetching, as we can see here, and we are going to add the parameters that we plan to catch in our handler, this fetch type, data usage server, and here we go. So this is our fetch. So in our case, it's going to be next and revalidate 0. Here we are going to trigger the use effect just once when we mount the component, and we return something like, and let's just color, and here we go. And we can write inside here that actually we will see on the front end CSR component that send, okay, an API call to route handler on first load that use data on the server. We're going to use the data on the server, just adding a new row inside our server file example.txt. Now we are going to import our new component inside the page, and we are going to include it here. It's going to be the component B, or here, other one. And here we, now we are ready to test it. npm run that. Let's see our page. We are going to see a new component on this route. The route is, this is the new route. And the new route is going to be this one, client server, fetch client server, first loading. Here we go. Let's see. We see the last component, that the CSR component, that's an API call from the browser, from the client. I sent an API call with use effect, and what happened here is that actually this client component, okay, after render, send an API call to this route, and this route perform an fs append file. We can see here on the file that actually new route is a server action. We are going yet. Let's see. Actually, we have to see action from route handler. Let's see. Refresh the page. Actually, we have an error here. fs is not defined. We forgot to define fs library here. We are going back to our API route. fs. Again, we refresh the page, and And now if we don't have any error, and if we open the file, we see action from route handler. Let's explore another group. Okay, we finished the first one, and we are going to discover new patterns inside this user event group on the client server technique. It means actually it's quite similar to the previous one. The only difference is that the invocation of the function, usually in this case, is fetching, but can be also a mutation from a form, and sometimes can be also like a simple function trigger from the client to the server that is not fetching data to external APIs, but it's just performing something on the server, where the invocation is from the user, from the client. And we are going to see different strategies. The first one is the server action inside a CSR component, and we are going to see three different methods. First two methods, actually, they use a form. So in this case, the user will fill the form and submit the data from the form to the server. So the server will receive some data from the client, and we can do whatever we want with this data. We can perform another API call from the server that is going to be safe because actually it's from the server. Another method is use server at the top of the server file. We're going to see actually is a server action. And we're going to see also the server action in the server-side component. Okay. And also server actions in the page, and also in this case we can use the route handler in the client component. Okay, so all these four subgroups is going to use a user event invocation. So let's start with the first one. We're going to create a server action inside a CSR component. We close this file, we create another group. So this new group is going to be a fetch invocation from the client, execution on the server, data usage on the server, but is triggered by the user event. This is a new route. And first of all, we create a page to match the route. And this is a page. Okay, is a standard page. And in this case, we are going to, if we go back here, we are going to start first method that actually is an action prop on the form element. And we create a page here. We need to create a form, okay? We can create a form directly in another file that we can also call client comps. Anyway, the form is going to be a CSR component. And we go the file here, and to declare that there is a use client component, we have to be sure it's rendered on the client because there is some interaction with the user, so we cannot render on the server. And here we go, we call this component export function. Let's call it add form. We are going to return just a form. Actually is this. In the form we create a prop action that is going to trigger the server action that we are going to create. So it means that from the client, when we submit the form, we trigger a function that is executed on the server. Okay, so we call it server action A, and we are going to create later, and we put some other stuff inside the standard in a form that is the label, and we can specify HTML from, we call it just to do, and the label is enter task. After we can add an input that is type text. Here we go, and we give an ID to this input that is actually to do. The name is also to do. Just put one, and let's put that we need it as required. Here we go. The first input is here. And we're going to add also a button for submission, and the style we are going to put just a little style. We want just a border, 1 pixel, solid, just gray, and a little bit padding just to separate from borders. It's 5 pixels, and here we go. And let's put also the radius. It's going to be 8 pixels. And here we go. So we add also the type that actually is the submit. And it's the submit here. And we're going to just put a text inside this button that is submit. Okay. So we create our client component. Now we need to create the server action function. Okay. So the server action is this one, server action from. We are going to create a new file here, like in the other component, and it's going to be server actions.js. And we create here inside this folder server actions.js. Declare as a server action, we need to put use server on top, like before, the fs from fs, and the same way we're going to perform. We're going to use the data inside the server with the file system, adding a new row on our file. And here we go. I can actually copy the same logic as before. We receive the data from the form here. So the form data is going to be data get to do. That actually is the name of our input. The file path is going to be the same, our file. And to check if this action is performed correctly, we're going to put server action from CSR form with action prop. Okay. And we also want to see the data that we send from the form. Okay, so we have everything here, and I think in the client component we add the server action A, and we just have to add on the page our form. We add the form in our page, so we return. We add the form here, okay, and let's see if it works. Okay, let's see if everything works correctly. Okay. And here we go. We have our front end here. We change route. Okay, the new one is the user event. And here we go. Let's see. We have our form. So we have our input and the submit. Okay, let's see. How are you? Okay, so now what happens if I click on submission? The add form that we create here, okay, will trigger this server action, okay, and send to the server action automatically the data, okay, the data that we put in our form, and we get to do here. Actually, we will get this data, and the how are you, we append the new row. Let's see if it works. So we submit, and we check our file, and actually server action from CSR form with action prop, how are you? So let's see the next one, that is a form action prop on other elements. So sometimes if we don't want to use the form, we can apply like a similar form behavior to other elements like buttons or others. Let's see how to use this technique. We can use the same client comp as before. Okay, we just change here, and the only difference actually is that inside this form, okay, we remove it from the form, and we just trigger the action here. Okay, we just trigger the action here, and we call directly form action. So we can put form action here, and actually as the same behavior as before. Okay, and we can leave everything like that. And if we don't need the input, we can also use like that, like a norm, like just like a fake form. We just put a button, and we can put some parameters inside our server action. We don't need to use the standard of the form, and we can put ciao come stai here. Okay, so we can change our server action to take this new parameter. Okay, form data is going to be just data directly. Okay, it's going to be just the data. And in this way, we just use a similar structure as before. We don't need to follow the form structure. And if we update here, going to submit, okay, we trigger this action. Let's see here what happened on the file, and we see that it works as the same way. Let's discover another technique that is apply a use server at the top of the server file. Okay, so in this case, we are going to perform a user event from the CSR, but we use server action with a use server at the top of the server action file. Let's see how it works. So we go back to our project and we go in our route. Okay, our route is that one from this page, and here we go. So what we are going to do now is just to create a normal component, is a CSR component A. We are going to return just a button, okay? Just a button to trigger on click, and we want to perform a server action inside here, and we call invoke server action. Okay, we're going to invoke server action. Here inside the onClick, we put the function in this way, and we add the server action. We create just a new one to differentiate server action B, and we put inside the function some parameters. So as you can see, this is the real actually benefit of the server action. You can include in your client component as easy as you see here, okay? And this function will be executed, will be triggered from the client, but will be executed on the server here. So we create a new server action in this page. It's going to be the same. Let's create a similar one. It's a server action here. And we just leave the data. Everything is going to be the same. We don't change anything. We go. We do the same. We append the file, and here we can write something different because actually this is a server action. This is a server action invoke from CSR component by the user. Okay, and here we put some data. We don't forget to add new client component that we create here, so we can see on the page. And we can just put under here the first form, our second button here, that is invoke server action. If we click here, it's going to perform that server action. Let's see if it works. We don't get any error here. We go to see on the file, and actually we add a new row that is server action invoke from CSR comp by the user. Let's discover the next strategy. Back in our map, we can start another group that is server action in a server-side rendered component, okay? That actually is just, it looks a little bit strange because actually server action are functions that run inside the server. So why I should use a server action inside a component that is rendered on the server? It's just when we declare that it's a server action, we are 100% sure that this function run on the server. Be really sure that this function is executed on the server. Let's see how it works. So we have two methods, that is server only form, or we use also a fake form, because actually that's important. We cannot add some event, some interaction on the server side rendered, because if we do that, if we specify on click or use effect and any other on event method, we're going to have an error from Next.js and force us to declare use client, transform this SSR in a CSR component. A way to solve this problem is to use a form, a server-only form, or in some case a fake form. Let's see how to integrate. We are going to create a server component, server comps.js, and to be sure that this component is executed and rendered on the server, we put server only on top of the file, and we import as before file system, and here we go. So we create, so what we want to do now is to trigger a server action from a form, from a server only form. In this case, the form will be rendered on the server, okay? We export our form that we can call add SSR form here. We go. So we return our form. here. It's just a normal form before. And we trigger also this action, okay, is the server action. We call it C, and we are going to create now. I'm going to just copy paste a similar code as before to make it faster. So we have our label here, we have our input that we call also the same to do, and we will trigger the submission with this button like before. But in this case, we are in the server, okay? The difference between this part and this other form, that is this form is rendered on the client, but this form is rendered on the server. It's quite different. If we need to render on the server, this is a good strategy actually to execute everything on the server, the component and also the action, the function, maybe some API call or other function executed on the server. So in this case, we are going to create a server action, but here we are on the server, so we don't need to create a separate file. If we want, we can create directly, okay, the function inside our component, our server component. So we create the function here, server action C, and we put some data here from the form. But we have to declare that is a server action, and we put the use server on top of our file. We are going to copy all the logics like before, change something, and we put server action from server only form with action prop, okay, and the form data that we get from the form. Actually, is everything the same. We didn't add the form yet on our page. Let's, in this case, is from the server comp file. Here we go, from server comps. Here we go. We add also our SSR component here. We refresh our page. Actually, serve some error. Let's wait. Okay, we put use server. Sorry, this mistake. Okay, this is our page. Okay, and we have new component here that is a SSR component. This is rendered on the server. This is rendered on the client. Okay, with this new one, this is a SSR, and we submit this data. We are going to check in our server file example that we see server action from server only form with action props. Another pattern that is similar to the server only form actually is a fake form. If we don't need a form, we can use also the same strategy. We need to create a fake form because, as I said before, we cannot add some user event like on click, like other directly on the SSR component, because if we do that, the Next.js will force us to declare that is a CSR component. But with this trick, we can skip it back to our route inside our server comp, and we create our fake form under here. We just want a button. We don't want to use a form. We just want a button, and we can actually add something like this inside a form. As we saw also before, inside the button, we just trigger a form action. We add a form action, so it will behave like just a normal button, but in this case, it's going to be server-side rendered, and we'll add some interaction with it. Okay, so we create a server action E here. We can also add the function inside the component because everything happened on the server, so we don't have any worry that this function is going to be executed on the client, but a server action. And we can put here server action from fake form with action prop. Actually, it's not action prop, but is a form action prop. See? So we don't need to add anything because it's already inside this component. We go back to our page and we see here is a fake form even SSR. If we click here, we will see that in our file, server action from fake form with the form action prop. So also this method works smoothly. This one is quite similar to this one. The page actually is an SSR component, so we can do the same on the page. We can use the same strategies on the page. We don't need to create some component if we don't want. We can integrate everything here in the page. So Let's see how we can do it, but I will just copy paste the code to make it faster. We are here on the page, okay? So from this page, we want to perform the same as we saw before. So actually we can add like a server action directly inside the page. We consider like a normal server-side render component, and we can put it here, and we can actually create directly a form in the page, and it's going to be exactly like this form here. We have a button here, we get the server action fake form event page. We trigger this button from the page, so we execute this function directly on the server. See? So we have a fake from event page. We have a problem. Of course, we didn't declare anything here. We need to put the file system also here. And here we go. We get the same fake from event page. We trigger this action, and we will see that everything, it added the row as we expected. A server action from page form with action problem. So we are at the end of this first column, first group, that is client server, that actually is the route handler method in CSR. It's quite similar to the previous one when we just triggered the invocation with the first loading. The structure is quite similar. We create a new client component to trigger our API call to our route handler. I copy actually the same code that we used before. The only difference that we don't add the use effect. We don't need to load, we don't need to execute the function when we render on the first load, but we trigger the function directly here with the onClick, okay? With onClick, we'll go into call route. The call route is this function that actually is just a fetch function that call our API route. So we are going to fetch type as the same as before is the data user server, because we don't use the data back to the client. Everything is quite simple and it's exactly like before. We are going to import the new component here on the page and up here on the bottom. Let's see, works correctly. Here we go. We save also this page here and for everything. So we have this new button here. So if we push this button, okay, it will trigger this function that make an API call to our route. Okay, to our API route here that is fetching this route. In the params, we specified that the fetch type is data usage server because we want to use the data on the server. Later, with the other method, we are going to add another one, this data usage client. In this case, we perform this action. Let's see what happened. So we trigger this button, okay, new row added successfully. We check, like before, our file. We see action from route handler, and this is our data that we retrieve from our API service. We finish this first group. Let's pass to the next one. That actually the only difference is that we use the data directly on the client. The invocation is from the client. We execute the function or API call or add any other operations on the server, and we return back some data on the client. And we have some pattern to do it. Let's start with the first group that actually trigger all the action from the first page loading. On this first pattern, we will see that we trigger from the page and pass some data to a CSR component. But actually, we will see also the case where we fetch from the page and we use directly on the page. Okay, let's see both solutions. We need to create a new route that we call fetch client server. We give back to client on first loading. So this is our page and we export default. That's the same as before. Function page. Here we go. And okay, here we're going to trigger the API call directly here from the server. Okay, like before. So I just copy paste the code as before. So we can use the async await because we are on the server, and we return actually the data here. So we can decide. So actually we can choose two different approach. Okay, the first one, we return directly on our page the data. So it's going to be rendered on the page. We fetch the data here. We are inside the page. It's going to be rendered on our page. let me just copy paste the same code as before, and here we are going just to put, okay, in this case we say, okay, we fetch the data and this is the page, okay, that fetch the data on first load and use that on the client side, but it's not rendered on the client, okay? It's rendered on the server and is returning back to the client. This is the data and we get from here. But we also can put, okay, we can also pass this data that we fetch on the page. Actually, it's a really common approach. We pass the data that we get from the page as a prop on the client, on the CSR component. So we are going to create a new component that is client-side rendered. We give some data that actually is this data here, okay, and here we go. So we need to create the component first, and we are going to import the CSR component here. We're going to create a new file that is client comps, exactly like before. We create here client comps.jsx. We just create a simple client component here. We have to declare as a use client, so all this component is going to be rendered on the browser. And what we are going to do here is just to pass, okay, it's just to create our CSR comp, okay, and as a prop we just pass the data that we already declare from the page. Here we go. So we have our data here. We return just some content, and we can do the same as before. Just copy everything. This is the page that fetch the data on first load and send the data to CSR comp as prop. This is the data. Okay, and here we go. We have everything. Let's see if it works. Okay, we save also this page, and that's going to open this one. Fetch client server client, and we can see here we have two components. Okay, the first one that we get the data, this is rendered on the server, and this is rendered on the client. So actually we see two different ways to fetch some data from the server side rendered page, passed as a prop to a CSR comp, or passed directly to the content of the page that is server side rendered, just with the async and await method. Now we see another pattern that is going to fetch some data from a SSR component and pass as a prop to a CSR. And the next one is going to be like opposite of this one. It's going to be passed to a SSR that is nested on the CSR component. Let's see the first one. We create an SSR component, okay? So we create a new file that is server component. Sorry, we can call it server comps. And to be sure that the server rendered, we put server only on the top of the file, and we create an SSR component. It's going to be asynchronous. We can do it if it's server-side component. And at the same way, we are going to fetch some data here, exactly like in the page before. We can use await, and we return exactly the same block, but we write something different. This is an SSR component that fetch data on first load and use the data on the client. Okay, this is the data, and this is that one. At this point, we are going to import actually the SSR component directly on the page from server comps. Here we go. We can put under here. So in this case, the data is fetched directly inside the SSR component, but actually is the same as we see here, because it's executed on the server and rendered on the server. Is the same is happening here, because inside the server component, the data is fetched on the server and is rendered on the server. It's just a different form. And if we go on the page, we will see that this third component works as expected. This is an SSR component that fetch data on first load, that use data on the client. This is the data. Okay. The next method is a little bit particular, because we are going to invoke, of course, the function from the client, but is executed on the server because it's inside the server-side rendered component, but this component is nested inside a client component. This is a special case, and actually we need a wrapper, a special component that wrap the SSR inside the CSR, because actually we cannot put directly we cannot import directly the SSR component inside the CSR because we are going to have an error from Next.js. Let's see how to do it. So we are back here. Inside the server component, we are going to create a new server component. It's going to be the SSR comp that we are going to insert inside the CSR, okay? And is everything here happening on the server. We can use at the same way the async method, and we can do exactly the same as the component on the top of this file. So we trigger a new fetch, and this is a SSR nested in a SSR component that fetch data on first load. They use the data on the client, and we show the data here. So to import this server component inside a server component, we need a special wrapper. We need a special component that wrap this SSR. So we go back on the client component. We create this wrapper component here, and I just copy everything to make it faster. We pass as children the SSR component here, okay? And we return just the children inside a fragment here. It's going to be like, in this way, we are able to import an SSR component inside this one. So we add this one on the page, okay? We can add here on the page, and we're going to create this component that wrap our new server component here that we export and we import here on our page. It's going to be inside our client component, okay? So here we go. We save this one, we save this one. It means that in this case we can create, for example, we need a complex component that needs some interaction with the user. So we need to put like a use effect or many other methods that give interaction. So we have to render on the client. We are forced to render on the client. But inside this component, we have maybe some part that performs some special operation that we want to be sure that are executed on the server. And so this is a method that helps us, like a sort of server action, but actually they are not server action as definition, but they are some server component nested inside the CSR. Let's see how it works. We have our fourth component. This is an SSR nested in a CSR component that fetch data on first load, that use data on the client. This is the data, and it works. The next step is a server action in a CSR component where the server actions return back some data to the client, to the CSR component on first loading. We are inside our client comps file. We create actually a new CSR component that we can call CSR comp s. We just put some things here. We already import our use state and use effect because in this case, if we want to re-render the client component after we got the data, the asynchronous data from the server actions, we need to use the state. So we declare some state here, for example, can be fetched data, okay? And this is the function to change state, set fetched data here, and call use state. The default value is going to be false, okay? So we use the effect here and we compile it and we add some value to the use effect. So what we want to do actually is to get some data, okay, from a server action that we are going to create just right now, and let data, okay, inside the use effect we declare a fetch data function that is async. Here we go, and we can put the data is returning back from our, okay, server action that we invoke here, okay? And after we got the data, we set a new state with the data that we receive. Okay, we can also, we can integrate just a try catch to catch some error, just in case API return some error. And here we go. We have here, we can just put a console error here. Here we go. We fetch the data, and here in the use effect, just trigger once, just when we mount the component, and we fetch data here. Okay, so after we fetch the data, we're going to change the state, and here we're going to add this block with this code that actually is some, here we don't need the fragment actually, and we have, okay, this is a CSR comp that send an API call. This is not correct because this is a CSR component that fetch data from a server action on first load, and under here we can put the data. This is the data, fetch the data. We can integrate some loading state while fetching the data. Okay, so it means that when it's false at the first state, okay, when I open this page, is going to be triggering, and it's false, that is going to return loading, and after when it change state, we see the data here. Let's create the server action here, the server action file, go. So it's just a normal fetching function that we can use also the same that we used before. It's a server action, fetch the data to our API and return back just the object, the data object. Let's see if everything worked. We forgot to put this new component on the page. Here we go, and we add under here. Okay, and here we go. As you can see, we refresh. So this is a CSR component, and we see that is loading the data, but actually the data doesn't arrive. Let's see why. Because server action is here. We get the data here, set fetch the data here. Okay, let's see what happened here. Oh, here we didn't import yet the server action. That's why it doesn't work. Server action from here, from the server action file. Here we go. We have our function. Let's refresh the page. It's loading, and we get the data. So when we refresh, it's going to be loading state, and after we will get some data. We're going to skip this server action in SSR because actually is quite similar to this one, and we just return back some data and we put on the component. Okay, so we don't need to spend time to this one. We just go to the next one, that is a route handler in CSR. Okay, and let's see, let's explain what's happening here. I invoke the function from the client, okay, on the first loading, and I will send an API call from our CSR to our route handler. In the route handler, we will perform the function execution. Maybe we fetch some data inside the server, and we'll return back to the client, and the client will update the state with the data that we got from the route handler. So let's see step by step how to integrate. So first of all, we're going to create a new client component here, and we can call this new component, actually can be an export const. It's going to be CSR comp b. Here we go. We have our body here. Also in this case, we are going to use exactly the same logic here with the state, with the use effect, but the fetch data inside here is not going to be the same. We are not going to use the server action, but we perform an API call to our route handler. Okay, the API call to our route handler is the same as we saw before. We can integrate also some error catch. So the response from our API call to our route handler in this case the fetching type is going to be data usage client, and we will see why, because we need to return back some data, not like before, not like the data usage server, that is a different method. And if a response is okay, if it's not okay, we're going to throw an error. If it's okay, we transform in JSON and we set our data in our state that automatically will update our content in our component that is going to be here, and we can put everything here. This is a CSR component that sends an API call to route handler on first load that use data to the client. So we get back the data at the beginning with false state is going to be loading, and when we get the data, the use effect update the state here, and we see the data directly rendered in our component. What we need to do now is to add another method to our fetching route handler. Okay, we already have the data user server. Let's integrate a new one, okay, that we can put here. And if the data usage client, okay, actually here will be the same. We perform an API call, we get the data, we transform in JSON. In this case, we don't perform any action on the server, but we just return a response that is not a message, but is directly the data that we get from the API call. Okay, that is just an object with the attribute fact that we will see here on our client component, and here we will catch the fact attribute. Let's see if it works. First of all, but first we have to import the CSR component inside our page to make it work. And we put under here, under the previous method, and here we go. Let's see, we refresh the page. As you can see, also in this second state, it's still loading. Maybe there is a little problem. Let's see why it doesn't get the data. The client component is here, response. If we set the fetch data here, so why doesn't give us the data server action? Okay, of course, because we have to use, no, actually it's not here. So why it doesn't give us, we make a mistake here, actually is case sensitive. And here we go, we update, and after loading we will get a new data from our API call. So what if I tell you that you can pass promises as props in CSR component? Amazing, right? You can actually perform some asynchronous operation, and you don't have to wait to render the whole component as the promises resolved in the server page or in the server component. So actually, this is a really useful approach when you have many promises, and you can, for example, perform a promise haul or some specific method to wait some promise and render some component first and other component later. It's just an alternative way to manage a component than the standard suspense that you can apply in Next.js. So passing a promise in React can be useful in a certain scenario. When you have a component that needs a fetching data synchronously, you can pass a promise as a prop to that component. This actually allows the component to handle the resolution or rejection of the promise. And later, after the promise is resolved, you can update its state accordingly when data is ready. Okay, let's see practically how we can integrate this specific strategy. So we are back to our project, and we are still in our route client server client first loading. Okay, and we want to integrate here on the same page this new method. We fetch the data directly in the page because actually we are in the server. What we want to do here is fetching data, and we don't want to wait, okay, that the promise is resolved here before the return, but we want to pass directly the promise as a props, and after inside the client component, when the promise is resolved, we will render part of the component or the whole component. We are going to create an array of we call API promises. Okay, we create this empty array, and after we are going to create an iteration that push some promises inside this array. So actually we are going to pass as a props an array of promises to our component, and we call this function make API call. Okay, and is of of course is asynchronous. We are going to pass a URL as parameter to this function, and here we go. We have the body, and we return. Actually, we cannot do it with fetch because Next.js will give us some error if we use the native fetch from Next.js. So we are going to use another library to fetch data that is really common and everybody know, that is Axios from Axios. And we are going to use that. I already installed in my package.json, so we have already this package installed, and we're going to use it. So we return the Axios and this get method, and we get the URL, and after when the promise is resolved, okay, it return a response, and we are going to return the response data value, and if we get some error, we are going to catch it with the error. And here we go. In the body, we are going to just console the error. It's going to be, we can, for example, create a dynamic string with the backtick. So we are going to show the terminal error making API call to our URL. So we're going to have a specific information about the error and the error itself. So we have our multiple API call. We're going to push all the API call inside the API promise really fast. We don't need to wait each API call is resolved, and we don't need to wait that each API call is complete before passing to the component, but we are going to pass all the promise. In this case, we define an API URLs list, and in our case is all the same, but you can change depending on your specific need. You can put many different endpoints, and of course usually you need many different endpoints to catch some different data depending on your needs. What we are going to do now is performing the API call and push the promise inside this array. So we can use the for each method. So we use API URL for each. So for each URL, we are going to get the URL itself, and we push these promises. Inside these promises, we push directly the function, the return of the function that actually is a promise not completed. Okay, here we go. We have this method here. Okay, and in our content, in our page content, we are going to create a new CSR component. We call it a CSR component C. Okay, and we pass as a prop the promises that we create just right now, and we pass directly the array. Okay, and we close the component. So now we are going to create the component inside the client comps, and what we are going to do here is to export the component that is CSR comp. Oh, I forgot to import here on the page, if not we will forget. And here we go, we import the component C, and we are creating here. So we destructure the promise here, the promise array, and we pass it to our client component. Okay, so in the client component we receive these promises on the browser, and we want to wait that the promises are resolved. After that we are able to render the component. To have this behavior, we need to apply the use state and also the use effect. We call it fetched data. So we create a get data function that is asynchronous, and what we are going to do here is just to wait that we are going to wait promises are completed. So we are going to use actually this method that is okay, the data array that it will be returned from all the promises is from await, and we want to wait all the promise. So is promise all and promise inside here. Here we go. So we are waiting that all the promises are resolved to get the data array here. Okay. We want to after that we want to set fetch data with the data array that we just got here. We invoke this function here, but only once, only the first time the component is mounted and rendered, and we return here some content. We create a fragment, and inside here we are going to specify text like that. We can say, okay, this is a CSR component that receives promises on first load from the SSR that actually is from the page, and render data after promise all. Okay, this is the data, and we want to show all the data here. We are going to close the span here just for the style, and under this we are going to create a ternary operator here. So is fetched data is null, so it's false. We are going to show a loading state. Okay, and when the fetched data is completed, so is true, we are going to map that array that we got from the promises. So fetched data dot map, and here we go. Let's put it here. We can put like this. Okay, so each item we're going to return the element that is just some text. Okay, always remember unique key for each component that you create in a array. You have to integrate a system that generates some different key. Let's see our page. We have all the promises resolved here. If we refresh again, we will see, okay, loading state, and after we will get all this rendered component here. Next step is a user event triggered function, where the invocation happened from the client, the execution is performed inside the server, and we use the data back on the client. The server returning back the data that we fetched inside the server to the client. But in this case, is the user that triggered the action. We have actually two different cases. The first case is we use again the server action. As you can see, we have the server action is included in many strategies because it's a really powerful tool in Next.js. My advice is use the server action as much as you can. Let's see, the first group is using a server action inside a client component as the same way as we saw before in the data usage in the server with the action, the formAction, and the use server. Actually, is exactly the same schema, but is returning back on the client. And we will see also the case with the route handler. We are going to create a new route because this is a different group of strategies, and this fetch client, server client, and triggered with the user event. Just create default page here with the container here. Okay. And in the first case, we are going to create a form. Okay, so we create a form later, but we just import here and we call it add form. And from our standard file that is client comps, so we create a file inside this folder, and of course it's use client because we want it to render on the client. Now we are going to create a form that use the props action to perform a server action actually. Okay, and this server action will return back. This is like a double function. Actually, it helps us to get double goals. Okay, the first one is to, from the form, we can send some data to the server to perform some mutation on the database. We want to change some data. And the second function is that we will get back from the server some fetched data, applying with the server action. Let's create our form that is from React. And here we go. And we are going to create a server action to trigger when we submit the form that we called add form. Here we go. We declare the states. Okay, is an asynchronous function. We can send some parameters also. Okay, we can use this function to send some parameters from the form. It actually are the form data here, and we wait for the response from the server action here, and this is the form data. So we wait for the response. After we got the data, we are going to set the resp state, this response.message. We set the resp state here, and with the response message from the server action. And here we go. We have our handler, and we return just a form. Okay, I will copy paste the same code as before to make it faster. And we see that inside the return, let's analyze what we have inside the form. We have the action prop that perform the invocation of this function, but we are not going to put the function directly, but we want to send some parameter. Okay, if we want to transfer the form data to this function and later to the server action, we need to use this syntax. Okay, we put a label and an input here that we can input some data, and after the button that performs the form submission. So what happened here, when we click the button, we trigger the form submission, and the form will call this action and trigger the handle action, the form data to the server action. We will see later that the server action perform an API call, give back the data from the API service, and we set as a state. So when we first render the component, it will be null here, so the content will be null, but after, when we get the data, it will show us the component with the text inside from the resp state. Let's create the server action, and the server action we can create here with a new file that is server actions. We create this here. Actually, we get the form data and get the input to do, and what we are going here, just copy paste the same fetching code as before, and we are returning a message that actually is the API data.fetch here. For example, if we have an API service that needs some parameters, we can use the form data to get some parameters. In this case, we can use the form data with the file system and add a new row. So we perform something on the server and we add the input from the form. Okay, in the file system, the server action from CSR form with action prop that also return data to client. We go, but actually we don't return this data to the client, but we return to the client some API data. Oh, actually we create the route outside our app. And now we are going to refresh the page and we get this form enter task. So we date it. This is my data, and we submit, and here we go. We got the API data here, and also if we check the file, we get a new row, server action from CSR comp with action prop that also return data to client. This is my input here. So let's see also this other method with the form action. There is also another strategy that is a start transition that is also recommended from the Next.js documentation. Let's see the formAction method, and here we go. We are in our project. Instead using the action as we saw before, directly on the element, in this case the button, formAction method here that perform exactly the same behavior as before, and here we go. We have the same behavior. So another method that we can apply in this context is the route handler in CSR. Exactly like before, we already created our route handler in API fetching. I just copy paste the component to make it faster, but actually it's quite similar to the previous one and using exactly the same concept. So we have a component that has a function that is called fetch data. So when we click on the button, we fetch the data, we set a loading state, we send an API call to our fetching API route. with the parameter data usage client. In this way, if you remember, we go back to our route. With this method, the data usage client, it return our data from the getFact API to our component. Okay, so after that we get this data. If we have problem, we're going to throw an error. If not, we get the JSON and we set the fetched data inside our state, and the component will re-render with the fetched data. We have to import this new component here inside our page from the client component, and here we go. If we refresh the page, we will see the new button that is called route. We trigger this, is a loading state, get the data, and return back our data. It demonstrates that we can also use the route handler with some event trigger from the user, and we get some data on the server and return back to the client component. We finished these first two groups here, and we are going to explore a new scenario where we make an API call directly on the client. Okay, so we fetch data on the client, on the browser, and we are giving back the data to the server to perform some actions inside the server. In some situation, we need to perform the API call on the browser. We have to manage the coarse limitation. Actually, making API call on the client and sending back the data to the server can have several benefits. It depends actually on the specific use case and application requirement, but maybe the first benefit, as I explained in the introduction part of this tutorial, can result in a reduced server load, because the client-side API can help to offload some of the processing data handling from the server, and sometimes it can lead to a faster user experience, because actually the client-side API calls can provide a faster response times for users, as they don't require waiting from the server-side processing. Upload all the code on the browser. If our connection with the server is interrupted, then we still can make some API call to third-party API from our browser. There is also the progressive enhancement, because the client-side API can be used to progressively enhance the application functionality, and gradually introducing new feature of data as the user interacts with the application. So let's dive inside the code and see how we can implement the API call from the client and give back the data to the server. We have also here two main groups, that is first loading and user event. So the first loading, as I explained, is we fetch the data just when we first load the page and we render all the elements. In this first scenario, we are going to analyze the API call from the browser and give the data back to the server using a server action. In the second case, we browse the API call, we send the API call, and we send back the data to our server with a post API call to our route handler inside Next.js. And also it's going to be exactly the same for the user event. Okay, let's see one by one. We start with this first one. First of all, we need to create another route, because actually we are analyzing a new group. We are going to create inside our app, that is fetch client, because the invocation is from the client, and the execution of the API call is also on the client, and the data usage is going to be on the server on first loading. The same way as before, we are going to create page here. It is called page.jsx. We export the page. We can copy the same block of code, and inside here, let's create a first example component to explain this concept, and we're going to call CSR comp hey, and we are going to import from our file as before, that is, we will call client comps. We're going to put the component here inside this div container. And here we go. Let's create our file for the client component, and we call client comps.jsx. We have to put the statement that is use client here, and here we go. For the first load, as we saw in the previous examples, we need a use effect to perform an API call after the first render, and then as we get the data, we update the state of the component. So we need import a use effect here from React, and we are going to export our component here. It's comp A, our body here, and here we go. The use effect here, the response from the API call. We are waiting here. Fetch will perform, and we can copy the same as before with a revalid 0, so we don't cache any data inside the Next.js. We const data here, and we put await also to transform the response to JSON. Here we go. We have our data here, and after this, after we got the data, we are going to perform a server action. Before I said we are going to update the state, I was mistaken. And actually, that's a mistake. We are not going to update the state, but we are going to perform a server action, so we don't need the use state because we are not going to update the component on the client. We're going to re-render. So we just perform a server action here, and we send the data that we got from the browser API call. And this is the data. The server action is here, and actually is this one. Create automatically, but we are going to create a new file here, and it's going to be server actions.js, and we just triggered the use effect just one on the first component mounting. So we return just block of text, this, and we see on the page as a static text that this is a CSR con that send an API call from the browser on first load and send data to server with server action. Okay, let's create. So the component is okay. We import already in our page. So it's server action.js, and here we go. We have our file here. We perform something in our server, and we use the same example as before. We're going to add a row inside our txt. So we use the file system library from Node.js, and we export our function, but actually is exactly like many functions that we used before. I just copy paste the same code as before. So we get the data from the client, we append on our file a new row that is server action from CSR component, the data retrieve, and here we put the data. Let's see if everything worked as expected. We have our page here. We are going to change the route because it's client server first loading. Let's see what we update this page. Actually, we don't get anything. Maybe there are some problems. Let's see. Server action here. The server action is okay. The server file example is here. We forgot. Fetch the data here. Okay, nobody invoke that function actually. That's why it doesn't work. If I refresh it, I refresh the page, and I will check that we get some new row in our txt file, server action from CSR comp, and the data retrieved on first load. And this is the data that we fetched from the browser. Let's see the second example that actually is similar to the first one, but instead, using a server action, we are going to make the API post call to the route handler. Back to our route. Should use this one. So we create a second component here, include an API call from the browser, and instead a server action will make a route handler call. We go, this is our comp. We are going to create a comp here. I just copy paste code block, make it faster because the syntax and the logic are similar to the previous one. And also here, what we are doing here, so we apply the use effect to perform a fetch data that actually make an API call direct to third-party services, okay, get some data, and we are going to send the data that we retrieved just now to our API route, to our route handler using a post request. Okay, so we need to implement the post handler inside our API route, because with the previous example, we just create the get. When we make a post call, we have to specify, because default is a get request. For the post, we have to specify some parameters here in the fetch, the method, the handlers, and also the body that we are going to send to our handler. And we need to send some data, but we have to stringify before sending. So here is our static content. Actually, we don't need a fragment here, just need a contain. Here we go. Let's modify, let's add another method here in our fetching that actually is post. We can have here, and actually is pretty similar to the previous one, but we declare that is a post request. We need, from the request, we get the JSON, okay? Going to get the body from the request because it's a post, and we're going to save this JSON. Actually, the attribute is going to be facts inside this request payload object, and we add inside our txt example. And it's mandatory to return a next response to the route, and we just send a message that confirmed operation succeed. Let's save it and let's see if it works. I refresh the page. We see the static content here as a second element. Going to check if in our txt file with a new row, as we want data received from CSR with API call from the browser on first load or user event, because we can use the same. We're going to use the same logic, and send data to server with route handler post request, and this is that we fetch it from the browser. Let's discover the second group that is pretty similar to the first one. The only difference is that we trigger the function with a user event, with a user action. So back to our project, we close this txt, we to create another route that is called fetch client server, but in this case it to be UE user event, and here we go. We also create a page here, page ESX here. At the same way, I'm going to copy exactly the same block as before, and we make some modification. Now we are going to import the component A. Okay, the same way we are going to create in our file, we're going to create client comps, and inside the client comps we are going to create a new component with use client. We get the, in this case, with anything here, I will see later. So we want to perform a server action, but instead using the use effect as before, when we first load the page, we are going to fetch the data when we click on the button. Okay, so when we click the button, we fetch the data here, we get the data from the getFact service, and we return the data to the server action that is going to be here in this new file, server actions.js. And actually we are going to create the same server action as before, because actually the behavior is the same, but the only difference, we are going to add a row to confirm that actually the case is this one, that we confirm this scenario that the action is performed from the user event. We just put server action from CSR component, data retrieved from a browser API call triggered by user event, and here we put the data that we fetch from the browser. So let's test it, and we're going to change it, and we go. We have our button here, and if we click on the button, we see that a new row added successfully, and if we check our txt file, we should find that this new row, server action from CSR comp, data retriever from a browser API call triggered by user event, a cat, a smart bones, and this is the data from the API call. And now we are going to explore the last strategy for this group, and it's quite similar for the previous one, when we have a browser API call and send the data back to the route handler, but the invocation is started by the user on clicking on the button. So let's see also this case. We are still in our page. We are going to create a second component here that is, we can call B. import here, add here the same way. So here we go. We add this component, okay? And this component is going to be this one. The component is quite similar to the previous one, but the only difference is that we don't have use effect, but we have a user action here. We fetch data, we make an API call from the browser. We are sending the data that we retrieve from the browser to our route handler, okay, with a post request. And we're going to stringify the data and set to the post request as a body. Here we have our content. Actually, we don't need a fragment. And here we go. This is a CSR component that sends an API call from the browser on user event, but the data is sent to the server with a route handler post request, instead the previous one that is a server, that was a server action. And here we go. Actually, we have everything the same. We already have our post handler inside the route handler, and we can perform this action. So we send the route handler API call. Let's see. A new row added successfully, so I should find a new row here that tell us exactly what we did just right now. We reached almost the end of this tutorial, and this is the last scenario that everything happened on the client, okay? I already explained you why sometimes we need to perform everything on the client. If you are working on React and not with Next.js, most of the time you will use this approach. You make an API call, but you have to take care of course problems. The first, so we're going to trigger from the client. We send API call from the client, the execution is on the client, and we use the data on the client to update the client component state with the new data. So also it's going to be the same as before, first loading page and user event. Let's explore the first one. We create the last route, the last group. It's going to be fetch client. First loading, here we go. We also create a page here. Okay, the page is exactly the same as before. We copy the same code and we create, here we're going to have only client components, okay? Client comps.js JSX. Here we go. I'm going to copy directly a code and explain you. We're going to use state, use effect. This is the component. There is both states. This is the state, the initial state that is false. In the use effect, when we first load, when we mount the component, we are going to perform this fetch data function that send an API request to other free API service, get fact. We get back the data, we transform in JSON, we set a new state of the component that it will make the component re-render again with this data, and here in the content, we are going to re-render the data here, okay? So this is a CSR component, fetch data from the browser on first load and use fetch data on the client. This is the data. It means that when we first load the page, the state is false, so it will give us a loading state, and when the data fetching is completed, we are going to change the state and show the data here with re-render. Let's see in action. And that is going to be client dot first loading. First loading. Let's see. Loading states, and here we go. We have the data as we expected. So this is the last scenario, and it's quite similar to the previous one, but in this case we trigger the API call and the re-render the component after we got the data. Let's see. Inside our page actually is a different group, so we need to create a new one because it's triggered by the user event. So it's client is fetch client dot user event. Go. We have our new route page.jsx here, and actually we can copy exactly the same code. We create the same page here in the client comps.jsx. Going to create some the component that actually is quite similar to the previous one, use state. We don't need to use effect here because the action is triggered from the user and not on the first load. The use state to change the state, we perform the fetching data here. When I click on click button here, I set fetch a data on loading, so it means it's not like before. Before I can set loading directly when I load the page because I'm triggering the data fetching, but in this case, I don't want to show anything, okay, on the content here. When I trigger, the button is starting a fetching process, and I show that this loading is waiting for data. After I got the data, I will set the fetch data state, and I will trigger the re-render and show on the component. Let's see if it works. We are the E. Okay, this is the CSR component, fetch data from browser on user event and use fetch data on the client. So I click here, it's loading state, and I get the data here. So it also works. We have reached the end of this video tutorial, and I genuinely hope you have enjoyed its content. If it has been helpful to you, please show your support by liking the video and sharing it with your friends on social media. If you haven't already, I warmly invite you to subscribe to my channel to stay updated on upcoming lessons. Don't forget to check out my website, devergolabs.com, where you will find a plethora of interesting programming content. You can also send me collaboration requests and explore all the programming services we offer. Your participation and support are crucial in my growing and to grow this community and providing you with even more valuable resources. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here with us, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video tutorial.